the first one is the whole issue that we've been looking at about it not being implicit. Just seems like they're talking about a different way of understanding how we learn. Like, we learn one thing explicitly and it helps us to know something else explicitly. Like in this example, if you have an explicit realization of emptiness, and you realize that emptiness means that things are not independent, then you can explicitly realize that they're dependent.
Did you mean explicit or implicit when you just said explicit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I said, but I mean explicitly. Like you're thinking, you have one thought, you have one conception, and then you have another conception, and I guess you could say by the force of, or induces, or all these words they use, but it just seems like very doable to me. By another.
Yes.
By consciousness.
So, yes, one explicit understanding leading to another explicit understanding. Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That just seems like solves. Are they trying to say that's in one consciousness? No.
I could answer you by saying this is a topic that Dendal Haramba is going to face directly.
Okay, great.
Pass it off on him.
All right. And the other is...
but certainly, one explicit understanding can lead to another explicit understanding, and these would be two understandings in a row, not occurring at the same time.
Yeah.
Just as you said. So, yes. In a row.
And
not occurring at the same time. Whereas, in what we're talking about here, and that makes a problem, is that Tsong-kha-pa talks about the two as occurring simultaneously. Okay. And so these folks are saying, hey, Dad, since Tsong-kha-pa's a guy, hey, Dad, he's called Father, right? Hey, Dad, how do these occur simultaneously? And in the poem that we're dealing with in chapter 13, you, Tsong-kha-pa, in this composition on the three principal aspects of the path that you wrote prior to your great commentary on Nagarjuna's fundamental treatise on the middle called Wisdom, you wrote that even prior to this fundamental great commentary. You said they occur simultaneously. Hey, Dad, what's up? Right? Father, Dad. Or as we said in my family, hey, Dad, Dad. Don't ask me where we picked up that pronunciation. Okay?
Yep, that's very helpful.
And you're being very helpful also by talking about some serial realizations. And when the one follows the other, the two can be explicit. I'm repeating what you said because it is so helpful. That the one leads to the other does not make the second one an implicit realization. It's just following after the first one. Very good.
And the other thing is it just seems a little like right before chapter 13, the footnote A on the page.
Yes.
This would be page 314. The footnote is about the consequence system. It starts off in the consequence consequentialist system, karma. It seems like we shouldn't pass that by without talking about it.
Uh,
Ascertaining consciousness induced by an inferential cognition is no longer called an inference, but it's a direct perception, even though it's still conceptual.
Yeah, if you go to chapter 2, Foundation of Buddhist Practice, that explains it.
Yeah.
So we've come back to
Yeah. Seems like
it is an important point.
something not to pass.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm guessing that what you're talking about is that once you have an inference that's based on a reason, then the subsequent moments of that so-called inference are no longer called inference in the consequent school. They're called direct perception. Why? Because those subsequent moments are no longer relying on the reason. Is that what you're talking about?
yes.
Good.
So with that, that little note there, it says that the reason for it to be a direct perceiver is that it no longer relies on the reason, but it relies on the power of experience.
Yes,
So
that's
the power
helpful.
of experience there refers to the inferential valid cognizer. That's the experience.
Yes, because it is an experience. And so you've caused me to remember a point. It's a direct perception that does not directly perceive. It's in Tibetan, so it's ngösum, but it's not ngösum du dokpa, which I just previously said in English. It's a direct perception that does not directly perceive.
But does it mean that inferential cognition lasts only one moment?
Now, what does one moment mean? That's why I said one period. Whether you say moment or period, the word's the same in Tibetan. One moment doesn't mean one tiny moment, because we don't function. I mean, even us fools will eventually have, people like us will have inference, and it doesn't operate in just one tiny moment. So what does its moment mean? Its moment is a period, a series of moments in which it operates. So that series of moments is called a moment or period. So I artfully, when I spoke about it, I spoke about its period. Which those in the know noticed. And you, because you're tuned in, you asked the very appropriate question, which brought out it's a really good point, and it's really nice to have people in another kind of know, which is, are we talking about a tiny moment? Which is, and so you brought out what's going on here, and that's really good. Which I was slow enough not to convey what I was deliberately translating.
Could you just say, like practically speaking, if you do a meditation on emptiness, for example, then, I don't know, for 20 minutes maybe you think about the reasons,
Yes.
and then you get it, let's say you get it, and this would be called inferential cognition. And
Yes.
after that, and after that, this will induce power of experience. Sorry, this will induce experience. And
No, it doesn't induce the experience. It is the experience.
Yes, it is the experience, and this induces the direct cognition.
It's subsequent moments, but moments again meaning that. And so I'm intuiting your next question. How long is that? Which you should ask. Which you should ask, and I know you're about to ask it. So I'm jumping in. I don't know. And what is a sensible answer to your question? Now, we use phrases like, as long as its functioning lasts, and its functioning will deteriorate and disappear, and you won't have that functioning anymore. Well, the period of its functioning has to have within it the period of the inference and the period of the direct perception, so-called direct perception that does not so-called, the direct perception that does not directly perceive, that operates dependent upon the power of the experience, which is the inference period, right? So we can't say that the direct perception occurs after the ceasing of, after the deterioration of the power, after the deterioration of the functioning of that consciousness. Can't be after that, because that's after you've become wacko, really, in terms of your realization. So where you're subject to superimposing inherent existence, okay? So I'm giving what's going through my mind. If we're dividing, right? We got divisions here. I'm turning to the camcorder, which is only seeing one of my hands. So where are we going to draw the line? I don't know. It's where it's no longer depending on the reasoning, but it's where that consciousness, that is this, that is this long, the period of that, the full period of the consciousness, at that point at which is no longer depending on the reasoning, but is depending upon the experience that depended on the reasoning, but is now depending on the experience itself of the strength, the power of the inference itself. That now is going to power more of the consciousness. It's really, it's an interesting insight. Well, what's just passing through my mind is, we call this Buddhist philosophy, but it definitely is Buddhist psychology, right? We have these terms, philosophy, psychology, and affective and, cognitive and affective, the cognitive and the affective are blended here very strongly, very strongly. Those who talk about Buddhist philosophy as if it were, this cold thing, it's all bullshit. The affective part of it, and the, for instance, describing the bottom line of realization as being the removal of the superimpositions, right? That looking at realization from the point of view, you see, in order to include implicit realization within realization, explicit realization means that the aspect of what is being realized appears to the mind. Implicit realization means that the aspect of the object of being realized is yet to appear. But all of the superimpositions have been eliminated. Superimpositions that are contrary to the object that is have been removed, have been eliminated. Dronto jeba. That once realization is described from that point of view, it strikes me as rooted in the affective, because it is, one could argue it from the other point of view, are clinging to the opposite of the object that is to be ascertained. That the process of realization is fraught with emotional havoc. You can't stand it. No matter the topic, and thus, I say, the process of cultivating compassion is seeped in at least very similar emotional havoc, and thus has a lot to do with opening the mind for what we put on the wisdom side as Gain Losang Gyatso of Tsenilaptra said, the method side, the cultivation of the method side is, he said something like, a chief way of developing wisdom. It'll just open the way for wisdom to come out. In other words, it breaks down all sorts of barriers. So you see, we so often talk about the two wings of the bird flying to enlightenment, as if the one's over here and the one's over there, one's affective and the other is cognitive. But in another way, the bird can't fly with one wing. The two wings work together if one wants to try to fix up the metaphor so that the two are working together. But it may be also that two wings is a metaphor that one should allow to work only so far. That it works only so far. And the cultivation of compassion has, and all the attendant, all the contributing factors that go along with it, developing the wish to get out of cyclic existence and all the attendant parts of that, impermanence, knowledge of death, the imminence of death, etc., that totally cuts out the necessity, the absolute necessity to pack yourself into a bar, even if you know you're going to get COVID. As basic as that. The how you cultivate compassion, how you cultivate the imminence of impermanence, etc. There's so much knowledge, knowing. There's so much knowledge, knowing, knowledge, knowing whatever of the two techniques or both of them that you use to cultivate compassion, the wish to, that lead to declaring that you're going to achieve enlightenment. There's so much knowledge. The Gyume or Jambel Shempen talked about, openly talked about those practices that way. Anyway, how did I get off on that? Yes. Anyway. The bottom line of realization being the elimination of superimpositions that are, exaggerations that are contrary to the object, be that impermanence, be that emptiness. And thus the meaning of the word ascertainment, that with implicit realization comes later, and that with explicit realization is at that time. So this is not at all a diversion from, experientially, when to me it feels as if one could experience that, where the dependence on the reasoning the feeling of, well, I'm not a diver, but if you were diving, you're on a diving board and you you jump off into the air, and I'm totally not a diver. And you jump, and you're up in the air, and you hang there for a while, and you feel yourself. You feel the power of the diving board for a while, and then you just go. You see, you don't dive. You just go and stay up there in the air. If you follow me. So there will be that period where you feel the impetus of the board that impelled you up, which I'm now imagining probably to be a bit longer, but there must be a feeling. I've never jumped off. Well, I don't know, maybe, I don't think I ever did, but I've watched. This is a fantasy diving board, where you're up there a while, and you feel that diving board, the impetus of that, and stay there for a while. And then you just stay. And then that power deteriorates and yeah. That's very important to know. Valid cognition, which is so important, leaves you. The capacity of that mind, it says, deteriorates. It collapses. So, you need calm abiding. So you need meditative stabilization. And we have a factor of stabilization already. Without it, there's something already there's a mental factor of stabilization which within us, which has to be cultivated. And then, so one thing I wanted to say a few times ago was that one thing I want to say a few times ago is this. It's often said you have to cultivate calm abiding first, and then analytical meditation, which gets the fancy name called special insight. But special insight is really my room turned dark. Must be a cloud outside. When I went like this, which is really a meditative stabilization, which is a union of calm abiding and special insight. Okay, anyway, you cultivate calm abiding, then you mix, you mix the stabilizing meditation and analytical meditation and bring the two together. But then what does it mean for people like us? What I wanted to convey is that people like us, it's often said, should do some stabilizing meditation and some analytical meditation. Now that means rather than following the advice to just do stabilizing meditation and achieve calm abiding, and then begin analytical meditation. Because we have to do a lot of hearing. That means getting straight a lot of teachings, doing some practice. Otherwise, when you do just stabilizing meditation, you're apt to get very silly and do a lot of crazy things. Your mind gets stable, but you're so stupid that you know, get carried away with yourself. And you don't have the bundle of techniques to keep yourself from self-aggrandizement and buying a whole lot of Rolls Royces and having sex with whoever you know, blah, 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 and this and that. You know, this is the period, you know, the 60s and all that. And then, you know, a lot of this is always going on. You know, because when you don't have to go all the way to calm abiding to get totally carried away with yourself. You get so you can, you know, read other people's minds a little bit and this and that, and they're totally overwhelmed with you, and you insist that they give you money and sex and cars and homage and, you know, all sorts of idiotic stuff. So anyway, one thing leads to another in these conversations, of course. So, other questions from those pages leading up to chapter 13? Asking a question is dangerous.
So, all the schools accept that the subsequent cognizers arise from the power of the inferential valve, or whatever valve cognizer it is, if it's inferential valve cognizer, so be it. So, the Prasangika doesn't seem to be redefining the process for them to arise, so why is it redefining, what merits the redefinition of a direct perceiver? Because all the schools accept that they're arising from the experience of the cognizer.
Sometimes I think that sometimes Charndakirti is trying to give Dignaga a hard time. I started a list of the things where I think he's doing this, where he could be doing this. And every now and then I run across it on my computer. I usually put it on the desktop so that I'll immediately, so that I won't forget it, and I'll make sure it's in the list. And then when I switch computers, it gets lost, and then I find it, and I put it back on the new desktop. So I should share that. It's like, you know, pramana being first, whereas it ends up being main. And so forth. It may be just that. I believe that what comes to my mind, I should say what comes to my mind, prati aksha, before the eyes. And therefore I can't quite remember. And from that somehow relying on experience. And even he says that the main prati aksha before the eyes. Then is the objects. Objects such as a cup. But still, he goes with the consciousness, of course. Good point. A very good point. Which just means I've noticed it myself. So, almost filled the hour. But stuff worth talking about, I hope. Who knows? Then, the first paragraph of chapter 13 reviews what's already been said. The second paragraph points out that according to Gain Yeshe, and I assume he's correct, but I'm relying solely on him, the three principal aspects of the path was written before Tsong-kha-pa's great commentary. I know nothing about the Tsako Rinpo Ngan-trakpa, whom Tsong-kha-pa mentions at the very end as the person to whom he wrote this poem. A good historian, and maybe Thupten Jinpa, who's the people in India at Ganden, at the Ganden conference, who attended the Ganden conference, who had read his book, his biography of Tsong-kha-pa, really gushingly, really mentioned that biography, right? Kimbala mentioned that biography. When they mentioned the biography that Thupten Jinpa recently published, they were thrilled with, people said, when I started reading it and had to put it down because I had to do such and such, I just wanted to get back to read it. And they said that Thupten Jinpa had just made Tsong-kha-pa's life come alive, that he's a real person. And despite my having been given 2 copies of it, I have not read it, and I just, as you know, I do my reading. Whenever I start reading something, I feel I should be translating and doing my job. And why I'm bringing it up is maybe there's something about Tsako Rinpo Ngan-trakpa in it. Perhaps I assume because this very, very famous poem was written and sent to him. And he's called child or son, not because, I assume, because he was a small child, but because this is how students are referred to. And a whole lot of people have, I don't know how many people have translated, but a number have translated the poem. I don't know of anyone else who has translated the Harama's commentary. Geshe Wangyal is the one who taught it to me first, and it's in his book. Natalie, do you know the title of the book?
Door of Liberation?
Door of Liberation. So he had me memorize it. And Thurman, I think, translated it and has it in a book along, and Geshe Wangyal, in Geshe Wangyal's book, it's along with the second or fourth Panchen Lama's commentary, practice commentary, which I think both Thurman and I separately published. I did it with Geshe Saba, and then again here, and Thurman somewhere that I don't remember. It's like if I feel anyone who touches it and is a translator feels they have to do it themselves also. And I feel the more the merrier. So this is just the section on the correct view. Dindal Haramba nicely, says, now, if you look at the top of the page, there's a page number and the chapter title, and that establishes, somebody asked, how do we know where the margin is? The margin tells you where Hopkins is. So if you come down from there, and it says Dindal Haramba's expansive commentary, and I is Hopkins, and that establishes where the margin is. And then when you come into this indent, that's Dindal Haramba. And so if you're ever confused, who's talking? Just go to the top of the page, and that'll tell you where Hopkins is. That underline up there, that tells you where the margin is. Hopkins is out at the margin. And in this section here, the first indent is Dindal Haramba. And this title is Dindal Haramba. And he tells you, not Hopkins. Hopkins translated it, but that ain't Hopkins. And he tells you what his breakdown of Tsong-kha-pa's section on the explanation of the correct view is. And how many parts it has? 5 parts. And so we get 1, why realization of the profound dependent arising is needed. He names the parts. Tsong-kha-pa doesn't name the parts. And then Tsong-kha-pa's stanza is in bold. So you'll always know where Tsong-kha-pa is. And then Dindal Haramba nicely rephrases the poetry into prose. And he words it as advice. And he doesn't say Tsong-kha-pa advises, but because it's in brackets, you know that the translator Hopkins put Tsong-kha-pa here so that you know it isn't Dindal Haramba advises, but then Dindal Haramba has taken the poem, the one stanza, and put it into prose. And you can go back and forth if you want between the poetry and the prose. And as I say in the material before Dindal Haramba, I have kept it. I have kept it into one long sentence. One long sentence. And I beg your forgiveness if it looks awkward. And I've been checking it. I got out the Tibetan, stretched it across my, whatever it is, 50-inch Samsung monitor, and checked the Tibetan, and I was thrilled with how literal it is to the Tibetan. I thought, oh, that's good, that's good. And then if you notice, after that one long sentence, I, the Jeffrey Hopkins, point out a bunch of things about, I say, notice that among the many ways of framing the topics, blah, blah, blah. And then with the second topic, right? And so on. So, you paid your money for one whole hour. So we're 2 minutes into the hour. I was 3 minutes late, and I'm cutting you short 1 minute. And gonna say goodbye to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now we've begun. See you around.